Yeah. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for taking out time and coming to what we were discussing is kind of like an outlier session in a convening on commons. We are going to be talking about peri-urban and urban commons in this session, and trying to think of how there can be convergences between the conversations we have already had over the past 3 days on rural commons, ecological commons in the countryside, and what is happening in various urban and urbanizing areas across India, across South Asia, I guess. My name is Anubhav Pradhan. I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Liberal Arts at the Indian Institute of Technology, Bhirai in Chhattisgarh. I work on urbanization primarily, urban literature, urban planning, and urban history across those verticals. My own connection to the commons is from this city itself. I've been working on agriculture in Delhi, along the Yamuna, on farming practices along the Yamuna, and the kind of legacy and history it has, and the kind of governance challenges, planning challenges that it brings. We have a panel which cuts across disciplinary praxis. We have Paras Kyagi, who's from the Cycle Foundation, Rishika Reddy from the Indo-German Center for Sustainability, sorry, it's a long name, from IIT Madras, Divya Ravindranath from the Indian Institute of Human Settlements, and Sachin Tiwari from Frankwater. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to pose a couple of, we have around 4 questions that, which will answer to each of our panelists' research and the work that they do. And I'm going to pose those questions to them and request them to talk for about 10 minutes on their work, the work that their organizations are doing on peri-urban and urban commons, and locate that within the framework, the larger, broad framework of those questions. Sachin, perhaps we can start with you. And for the benefit of the audience here, I just read out the question that we have in our agenda. How can we ensure, that's a question for Paras, Sachin, the question for you was, in what ways might the lessons learned from India's rural-urban transition inform sustainable urban development strategies? Thank you, Sachin.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. And my name is Sachin Tiwari. I represent an organization called Frankwater. It's a UK-based organization, and we work in the area of water. And we fund water projects across the country, and our intention is to understand the water challenges and how we might want to create successful demonstrations of what works, and then to see if we can develop that into an informed advice or recommendations into the policy process. So one way I can begin is to talk about where the work sort of is destined, and then come backwards to what have we done in the specifics. So in the last year, 2023, there are 2 pieces of legislations which came about in India. One in the state of Odisha and one in the state of Tamil Nadu. And these are happening somewhat away from the general limelight of all the policy and the legal action in the country. So Odisha state came out with the Odisha Rural-Urban Transition Policy. This was notified in June 2023, so it's already in force. This is the first ever transition-specific policy introduced by a state government. And in many ways, it's landmark for people who are trying to cope with the challenges of peri-urban areas and the transition from a rural context to urban context. So Odisha Rural-Urban Transition Policy in several ways is sort of a landmark change that happened last year. In this, organizations like FES and us, this work is enabled by a lot of collaborators. So FES is one of them. This has been informed by the work and the demonstrations on watershed level that we have been doing, and trying to inform how these water resources need to be looked differently from just as a source to be extracted. So this policy is a successful outcome of the kind of demonstrations and ideas we are trying to explore in the space of peri-urban areas, and particularly related to water, which has a very strong characteristic of being commons. So that's one. And then similarly, Tamil Nadu government came up with a revision on their Town and Country Planning Act. That also happened in 2023. In fact, they've changed the name. Now the Tamil Nadu state government's Town and Country Planning Act is called Tamil Nadu Regional and Urban Planning and Development Act. And this was also in 2023. The biggest shift that has happened is, as opposed to your conventional town and country planning, which happens on very finite, city-based units, Tamil Nadu said, we're going to be looking at the region and we're going to reverse the process. We will look at communities and the environmental needs, come from there and then plan our towns. So this was a complete reversal and quite a landmark change. These two are examples of where all our experiments in understanding peri-urban areas and trying to create demonstrations could lead to. So this is the short response to the question about what can we learn from the rural-urban transition and how does it change the sustainable development strategies for local and regional governments. What have we done? We worked at watershed level, and we said watershed is a unit that we need to understand and get it correct. If we do that, I think the integral of it at a basin scale or a sub-basin scale or at a regional scale will fall in line. So we started with hydrological modeling of a watershed in a pilot area. We picked up a peri-urban area. We've been doing that for a couple of years. So the first area that we picked up was Anikal outside Bangalore. Anikal is a town characterized by all of that you can see as a transition. A town expanding, townspeople trying to, finding work in factories or, urban jobs or commuting to the urban. The resource exchange and the dynamics between the town and the closest urban metropolitan region being of a certain kind where, the urban area supports a lot of consumptive needs of the city. And then finally, more importantly, you'll see that the resource stress in terms of land use, in terms of agricultural resources and water starts increasing very rapidly. Now, these are the situations which could easily go out of control. So we said, now this is where we try to understand the watershed, understand the water allocations, and then try to develop a process of collective action where the stakeholders have, first of all, a voice, a consensus that this watershed and its resources, its water that is apparent and which is underneath, is a matter of collective deliberation. So that is where we started. So the project, in the common parlance, is called a corporate water stewardship project that we're doing. Corporate water stewardship is based on the idea that corporations should take the lead in watersheds or in areas where they have a lot of demands being placed on the resources, on water resources specifically. And they should be of all the stakeholders, like the community, the government, agricultural users. Of all of these stakeholders, corporates must be more forthcoming in taking the lead. Now, there are global dynamics which are guiding this work. One of them is that corporations now have to report on their resource use and their water footprints. That is one thing which is guiding them to become, even if reluctant, stewards of the watershed, or be answerable at least. And similarly, you have the regulators in most of these countries, like the SEBI in India or the Securities Exchange Commission in the US, all of them saying, please report on all your water uses. So these dynamics are causing corporations to now look at watersheds and resources that the water that they're abstracting from those watersheds and be answerable to that. We with FES, we have a project where we started stacking these things together, and we said, first of all, there should be as prolific a water data sharing across all the stakeholders as we can, because data is the first step towards dispelling any sort of a misunderstanding or contestations which start. And then based on the data, you actually have a meeting point to start talking about the shared resources and how you might want to go about it. So, and this is where we then layered, once we have created the data through the watershed modeling, this is the technical piece where we build a model of the watershed, understand the current water allocations, then layer on projections for 10 years, 20 years, and 30 years. In the current state of water sector practice, this is a slightly pioneering step because we haven't been doing scenario plannings and projections. I mean, our line ministry departments have been doing that for years, but internally. In the development sector, in the civil society space, this way of working on water resources is new. So I'll stop there. I'll just connect it back to the idea of commons and the principles of commons that Ostrom also talked about, where there are 8 principles for managing the commons. One of them says, define the boundaries. And I think this is our step in trying to start placing boundaries and make hitherto invisible water visible through data and through working mechanisms. Over to you, please.
Thank you, Sachin. I'd like to now request Givya to kick on. And the question for Givya is that how can policymakers and urban planners balance the need for economic development in urban and peri-urban areas with environment conservation and community-based livelihoods? Thank you, Givya.
Thanks for that. I think only I have an answer to half of that question. So I'm going to start with that, and then perhaps through what others have to say, I will find an answer to the second half. So just to give you a quick introduction of the work that we do, a lot of my work is with informal, organizations that work with informal workers, a lot on women's work and migration to the cities. And very often we think of the peri-urban areas as the first entry point for a lot of migrant communities that are choosing to come to the urban to start work, right? So they come in groups, they come through contractors, and the first sort of settlements are on the outskirts of the city, are on the peripheries of the city. That's the quick first entry point. And very often what we notice is the only place through which they have a sense of, citizenship is too big a word, but some kind of, stake building in the cities through access to commons, whether it is for fuel wood, whether it is for water, whether it is for even a space to just rest, experience leisure, or have any kind of experience of what the urban means, is through these common spaces that exist on the peri-urban area. Now, with a lot of migrant communities, when we do our research, we realize that these spaces are shrinking because as peri-urban areas start urbanizing further, there is infrastructural pressure, and as infrastructure starts growing, it is these kinds of common spaces that start disappearing first. And so spaces like lakes, even something as something small that people wouldn't think of in the popular culture or in public as commons, but trees, these are the first to be felled, and we've had long conversations on this in Bangalore city especially, where over 40,000 trees have been cut over the last decade or so to make bigger roads, and they affect livelihoods in urban areas more than anything else, because that's where street vendors sit, that's where gig workers rest, that's where a lot of experience of taking pressure off from extremely high stress urban life is experienced by a lot of these communities. So as I said, I do have half an answer as to what is the role and importance of commons within peri-urban areas, especially from the point of view of livelihoods of those trying to get a foothold into the city and entering through the livelihoods in the informal sector. So not directly coming into employment and sort of losing access to other livelihood opportunities in the villages. So these are communities in transition. These are communities that are trying to urbanize alongside the urbanization of the city or the town itself. So there is sort of, dual process together that's happening there.
I think what we are going to also eventually do as we open up is sort of think about what actually is peri-urban. There's a sort of, there are multiple ways, and Sachin and Rishika and I were talking about this yesterday or day before yesterday. There are various ways in which we can think about what constitutes the peri-urban, but perhaps we'll come to that stage when we can take your responses also. For now, let me pass the mic to Rishika.
Hi, everyone. Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. No, it's not working. Okay. I thought I had a presentation that we could put up, but I can go on, right? Yeah. So, and we work with actually and I'm from, sorry, I forgot to introduce myself, but I'm from the Peri-Urban initiative, where we are a loose collection of researchers, urban planners, and other policy actors that come together in trying to understand the peri-urbanization process and, the rapid depletion of the commons in the peri-urban, and combine it with the effects of climate change and look at communities that are most prone or being bypassed by these developments of urbanism. And it is in this context that we did conduct a study with regards to food systems in Chennai. And this was done during the COVID time when all the food markets were shut, and we were looking at alternate sources of distribution channels. And that's when it propped to us that, that how do cities, can cities ever become like food sovereign by themselves? And most of the food, like, Chennai has the highest food miles when it comes to other cities in India. And the peri-urban agriculture forms a very important part of, this supply chain. And what we were trying to, I wish I could show you the slides, but when we could look at it, we could see that, if we didn't have control over private land ownership, but we could, look at the commons, and especially commons with access to water resources, right? The commons that are around the tanks. And when we estimated, just if we use 30% of the commons associated with the water bodies of the larger Chennai bioregion, where we looked at the entire watershed of Chennai, which includes 4 different rivers, and the associated tank systems, with just like 20 to 30% of that land, we could cater to the food needs of the entire water of the entire bioregion in itself, and probably even generate surplus. Now, how does this model actually translate into reality is we would like to have a mixed governance model. It can't come from the conventional supply chains. So it has to have a mixed governance model where you have the landless that are given rights, the first rights to cultivate, where it also improves their nutritional security, as well as, the women's self-help groups are able to, develop alternate livelihood opportunities around these airy commons. And, that increases the economics, the social stewardship of the commons of that water body, as well as contributes to, ecological conservation of the water body as well, because they've started seeing utility in it. And in one of the, we've started then translating it through some CSR initiatives in a satellite town of Chennai, which is called Peri-Urban, where there's a lot of industrialization that's been happening for a while. But, there are some parts of the taluk which have been left out from getting the benefits of this urbanization, right? The jobs don't go to them, they go to the migrants. And, because these people probably question them for rights, or, and then that props up social unrest, because their traditional livelihoods have been lost, and they do not have newer livelihood opportunities that has gotten generated by these factories that have come up. So one of the things that we do with them is with women and youth there too, we've started looking at, and the village has lost close to about 12 it has about 12 water bodies that have completely become dysfunctional now, because the main channels of water supply of these cascading canals have been affected. And so what we do is kind of like, as a part of the restoration activities, it can't just be like an ecological restoration, but also includes the other utility activities of the local communities. And with them, we try and co-design pathways of that they would look to transition into better lifestyles and to deal with the climate change effects that are occurring in that region. So we did have these airy commons with the self-help groups being recultivated back along the dry edge and the soft bank edge of the boundaries. Along with that, there is a farming network, and we connect them to, with the SHG groups are connected to provide bio inputs to ensure that the larger watershed is also encouraged to start doing climate resilient farming. And the other activities are around rewilding some of the common spaces as a part of the waterscape restoration, because there's been it's been used as a playground, but there's also that, there's been heavy infestation of invasive species like Prosopis juliflora, etc. And as a part of the, it can't just be a rewilding initiative, but we've been trying to develop it as a wild play garden where there's also elements of art and aestheticism that's been integrated into the rewilding initiative, where it provides separate utility spaces for the youth, the women, and the younger children to reconnect back with the wilderness and with the commons, and a space where each of them can also form interconnectedness and community bonds through these initiatives. Yeah, but some of the work we do. Yeah.
Thank you, Rishika.
Yeah.
Let me now request Paras to talk about community, and the question that we have for Paras, sorry Rishika, I forgot to read out your question, but the prompt that we have for Paras is, how can we ensure that the voices and needs of local communities are effectively incorporated in the decision-making process in peri-urban spaces? Thank you
for the question, Anubhav. Hi, hello everybody. I wish I had the presentation with me because I want to show some photographs, because what the kind of work we do in Delhi villages is that, as Anubhav posed the question to me, that what should we do when it comes to the community? The basic common sense is we talk to them. If their language is different, you learn their language. And I happen to be from one of the villages, so that is the sole reason I have been able to do this work in Delhi. And I'm not really blind to technology that way. I will demonstrate to you how exactly we are able to talk to not only the community, but the government as well, and make sure that decisions are coming in our favor. Very good examples. Naveen, is the presentation coming up? Oh, thank you so much. So when it comes to commons, I'm sure everybody knows about MC Mehta judgment of the 1996. This is kind of the hallmark that everybody talks about it, that Mr. Mehta said at that point of time, nobody has got the right to poison the society, because he was so passionate about the environment. I will not waste time for anybody. Please have a look at this presentation. First image for you. You can see there are some red, first only. So there are some red lines and there is a build-up. You can see. This is the GIS-based revenue map of a village in Delhi. I mean to point out, you can see the land, what is happening at the land, and what kind of build-up is coming up. Next slide, please. Now observe the satellite images from 2010. There is a village, there are ponds, there is kind of commons. So Naveen, you can just shift. 2010, 11, then comes again 11, 14, 15, 16. Just stop. So that pond in the middle, you can see in 2010, there was any kind of a road was not coming up. If you can just it's a matter of observation. If you can see, this happened because some kind of land allotment happened because government wanted to bring a road to this village. What comes with road? Development. Next slide, please. So this development is coming up, and you can see what is happening with this commons. It's a pond of the village, and government knows since 1996 in 2007 it is illegal. It is not possible for the government to use any kind of act or any law to kind of, they're actually murdering this common. And they're doing it, you can imagine it is happening from 2010, 12, 13, and nobody's talking about it. Next slide, please. So this has happened. This is Urban Extension Road of Delhi, third road for extension of Delhi, because they are urbanizing Delhi for the past 6-7 decades. It is illegal as per Delhi High Court, illegal as per Supreme Court, but they are doing it. So imagine this is happening right in front of our eyes. The problem is the communities are not what they used to be, in the 60s, 70s or 80s or right now. So much has changed. The priority for the communities is difficult to estimate because I'm talking about a rural village in the national capital. Can you imagine a farmer in Delhi able to enjoy, a good lifestyle and able to meet the expenses of her family with agriculture? It's impractical, as Rishika has just said. Imagine somebody has land in Peri-Urban. Can they really manage? If they have large land holding, which is not possible anymore, families have been increasing from the 1950s. The size of a family in the 1950s was very different with what I have in 2010 or 13 or 24. Next slide, please. So we can see 2024. I just prepared this slide last night just to show. And I already told you I belong to one of the villages just like that. In my village also, government is doing this kind of construction on the pond, but we are not keeping quiet. We have filed a case in the court. What happened? So in the court, first of all, I was asked that, please tell us, how do you know it's a pond? So I said, this is a revenue department document. Next, they say, see, this is an old document, land use must have been changed. Then I quoted this DDA Development Act as in the first, Sachin mentioned that the development authorities who are actively concerned about the communities, they are bringing changes in their act. Unfortunately, in the national capital, Delhi Development Authority has not been challenged that way by the communities because unfortunately many people don't know the Delhi villages scenario where higher education opportunity is not available for them. People really don't know their rights, which we have been learning in the last session also, that unless people know their rights, how would they really do something about it? Next slide, please. So this is the example for you to understand the kind of work we do. A revenue map of a village, you superimpose it through the access of tools, technology, and you make sure speak to the government the way they can understand it. How can the government say that they don't know where is common land? Which kind of common land? What kind of build-up? Next slide, please. See, it's pretty easy to talk to the government and bring changes in your life through the right kind of advocacy. Next slide, please. Next. See, this is a master plan of 2021. Imagine, nothing for the village. So kind of city planning which is coming to the villages. So imagine the city planners, what are they doing with the local communities? Is there any city planner in the country who has ever thought that if a city can have a master plan, can't the village which is being engulfed by a city have a village development plan? Next slide, please. So unauthorized construction is coming up. Government is not bothered because it brings vote banks to them, like Chennai, Bangalore. Bangalore has Akrama Sakuma, Delhi has unauthorized colonies. I'm sure everybody knows the Delhi politics. What is the base of the Delhi politics? These kind of vote banks. Next slide, please. Unauthorized construction has been recognized, but village has nowhere present. Next slide, please. This is happening right for 2-3 decades. They knew what's coming. They're not talking to the people. And people cannot find these things. I went to one of the DDA departments. I speak to the person. Please tell me the master MPD document. Unfortunately, I didn't disclose him to, I am from National Law School or I am from somewhere else. The person just kept talking to me, what do you want, why do you want? And unfortunately, as everybody knows, it's unless you, bring some kind of a commercials to these people, it's difficult to get this information. Ladies and gentlemen, I could afford to do it. That's the reason I got these documents. So next slide, please. This is the base of Delhi villages, where the city is growing on. You have the planning and architecture right in the center of the city. They talk about planning across the country, but imagine what they are doing to Delhi villages. Next slide, please. This is how Delhi villages are. If you can understand the geography of Delhi, it is like being urbanized in the center, and it is expanding now. In the same model I showed to you, many urban commons are sacrificed in this development and transformation. Next slide, please. This is all the water bodies of Delhi. What we did, we superimposed them on the geography of Delhi so that I could, speak to the decision makers. What are you doing with these water bodies? We know the MC Mehta judgment. We know the Delhi High Court judgment. What are you doing with it? Next slide, please. This is, again, just to show you, in case you understand the water bodies. Next slide. This is the master plan of 2021. Next slide, Naveen, please. That's it. This is master plan 2041. So our main proposition in the case to the government right now, which is going on, The government is filing false affidavits, but the kind of technology which is available and the kind of research capabilities young people have, it is very much possible to talk to the people, talk to the decision makers, and make sure they, they kind of admit they're wrong. So what we are arguing that why don't you earmark the water body as it is as a land use in the master plan? That is our proposition. That is the way we want to talk to the community. And ladies and gentlemen, the way we have prepared these maps is I kind of gelled with the younger people of the villages, youth. So it's not like when somebody says rural youth is being disillusioned or they are not taking the right decisions. See, if they don't have the opportunity, they will certainly go to these wrong directions. But somewhere in every village, there are young people who are really concerned, and I am happy that I was able to, kind of collaborate with many different youngsters. I'm sure people who know Delhi, they would have heard Bhavana, Najafgarh, and all these names in their mind for wrong reasons. Why? Because Delhi village has gangsters and movies and things like that. But I went to the villages with an open mind and with very, very much interest and concern, which I was able to prove it to them, and I was able to win their confidence. And all these maps were prepared how? A couple of years back, there was an Environment Day, World Environment Day, and just before, a few weeks before that, I kind of gathered the younger people together. It was not like a convening like this where you were physically present. Technology, COVID was there. So we were talking to these people through Zoom meetings and whatever way we could talk. And we decided, all of us are in Delhi villages, different Delhi villages. Let's just go for it. We use these applications and Google and things like that. And we kind of gathered the Google-based photographs of the ponds right where it is in different villages. And we were able to collect that as an evidence. And we sent it to all the decision makers in Delhi and were able to draw their attention. And with time, we have been able to bring certain changes in the Delhi governments and the central government department who are caring about these water bodies. And we are hoping that with more court cases and more discussions with the portion which was posed to me was how to involve these local communities. So with whole heart, I believe that there is no other opportunity unless you talk to the people. And it's up to you. See, if you are really a professional person, if you really cannot talk to the community, it is not proven unless and until you can earn their trust if they are with you for the commons. Because we are talking about the greater common good. If it is really the greater common good, and you're not able to talk to the people, and you're not able to bring their confidence in the mainstream, then certainly there are things you're doing the wrong way. It was not very easy that I was able to do this. Initially, people used to look at me from a different perspective, that this person might have some vested interest. Ultimately, with time, I was able to prove myself, and I'm luckily to having lots of collaborations in Delhi villages because of my advocacy work I do. This is the first part of the presentation. It was about water bodies. I just had one more thing. The time permit? One more minute. Next slide, Naveen. See, this is the WPC of 1996. Imagine, ladies and gentlemen, what is written. This is just one part of this judgment. It clearly says that reserved forests, which we talk about in Delhi, which was the basis of 1996 decision of the Supreme Court, was the common land of the villages were utilized to create these reserve forests. So imagine, so many people are talking about FRA and across the country. And again, after winning confidence of the people, talking to the government, why FRA is not successful? Because everybody is forgetting this one simple fact. See, we are talking about land. Land kind of invites everybody's attention. So people who know in different parts of the country that, look what has happened in Delhi. The government was able to get away with kind of grabbing the gaon sabha of the villages, because I'm talking about 96 and I'm talking about villages which belong to the Gujar community. Unfortunately, there is not even a single college in 17, 18 villages. And these all villages happen to be in South Delhi. So there are a lot of invisible, communities suffering, which my fellow panelists have also discussed, that people do feel left out. But anyway, I don't want to go into the deep. Everybody knows what is happening. I had just 2 images. Next slide, Levin, please. Just next. Just this. So it's you can only see village land, people living, and the forest land. What is happening on it, we can easily show with the app of, next slide, please. So this technology available to make sure we can talk to the government, we can talk to the community, we can discuss with the community, and we can really, kind of win the trust of the people and go for the greater common good, achieve it in the right perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Paras. I just have some quick summation notes and then open this up for discussion. See, one of the funny things about doing research in India is that we are shackled by the English language. It's a beautiful thing, but it's also unfortunate. The word commons to me always evokes a very, country versus city kind of dichotomy, which is a fairly standard European, way of looking at urbanization, right? That, that there is something called a city. It ends where the city wall ends, and everything outside that is the countryside. There's a lot of work which many different kinds of historians have done, which shows that South Asian urbanization historically did not work like that. It wasn't as if there were these very rigid demarcations of this is city, this is countryside. The values of the countryside were present in what is considered the city, and the values of the city were also present. It's like a continuum. So it's interesting and useful to think of what there are ways in which we think of, let us say, the census of India will tell us what constitutes a town, what constitutes a Nagar Panchayat, what constitutes a Nagar Palika, what constitutes a city, right? These are all premised on the basis of regulations. These are all freely available. I'm sure most, if not all of us, already know about this in this room. This is how we usually think, okay, this is a city, this is a village. But how do we find that happening, acting out on ground is something that becomes useful to think of when we think, what is peri-urban? Right? Because peri-urban is becoming a category epistemically as well as in governance terms, but it's not necessary. It's still a somewhat fuzzy category. Right? What is exactly peri-urban? So in this panel, we've been thinking about various notions of what is peri-urban and what it can do with reference to ecology, with reference to what are commons. We can think about, we started with thinking about hydrological planning and water as a very vital resource, and sort of a kind of scenario planning mode of engaging with water resources in urban and peri-urban areas, which comes from an understanding of how these are brought under various governance frameworks. We moved on to think about informal work, about how informal work and informal settlements will often be in what are considered peri-urban areas, or they are considered to have the characteristics of peri-urban areas, even if they are not. I mean, there are informal settlements only half a kilometer away from here, but they will be considered to have characteristics of peri-urban areas. And very importantly, how in that sense, there is an overlap of, it's almost like a place of refuge, it's a place of risk, it's a place of not just the right to the city, but also belonging to the city, right? How both of those come together. Rishika took us to thinking about a very important aspect of sustainability, which is food sovereignty. Right? How do we, taking on from the discussion with Sachin also started, how do we think about the ecological resources, ecological commons which are existing in all our cities, which are existing in all kinds of demographics, and think about connecting the question of environment and livelihood in a sustainable manner so that you can have a restoration and rejuvenation of those resources without compromising on the, and I like how you spoke about, it's a lifestyle issue also. It's not just a livelihood issue, it's a lifestyle issue as well. And of course, Paras and I used to engage in a urban advocacy campaign which used to run in this city some years back. So Paras has very eloquently spoken about how infrastructural realignments which have been happening all across cities like Delhi, other kinds of cities, Bangalore, about how this kind of centralized planning process which happens, which, parastatals like the Delhi Development Authority, various planning authorities, will have a vision of how the city should develop. And there is not enough participation from the different kinds of stakeholders and communities that we have in what is considered a city. The case of Delhi is even more, as Giri Wala's like to say, the case of Delhi is more complicated because it's a city, it's also a state, it's a very urbanized kind of state, but it also has reserve forests, it also has Gram Sabhas, and to think about how community agency can be reclaimed, leveraging the power of technology, which is like a low-hanging fruit. You don't need like an investment of crores of rupees to do that kind of advocacy. It's something which can be done with a bit of commitment and effort. So I'd like to now open this up. We have enough time, around 25 minutes, for an open discussion. If anybody has any thoughts, ideas, comments, any specific questions to any of the panelists, please, if you could introduce yourself and go ahead, sir. Yes.
I'm Dinesh Marothia. I'm president of the Indian Society of Agriculture Economics. I will just share on the basis of my recent book on multi-use wetland governance. This is just published by the Rootles. And there I have included almost 40 peri-urban multi-use wetlands. Now, listening to the panelist or the expert, let us understand that these peri-urban multi-use wetlands, they have very strong ecosystem services, and since centuries they have been, catering the needs of the people in terms of whether it is the aquatic crops, the foxnut, the chestnut, the lotus products, many kind of the lotus product, and the freshwater aquaculture. Besides that, they have also been used for the human and the animal and domestic need. So in many places where there is no water, these peri-urban wetlands, they have been also, meeting the demand of the domestic and for humans and non-humans also. So what is happening now? So if I will take I will just give you example of 2 or 3 wetlands. But before that, I will share with you what are the major contradictions when we talk about the peri-urban governance. So the Ramsar Convention has very clearly said that, you have to take care of, under the resolution, to protect the peri-urban wetlands. And the Government of India is the signatory of the Ramsar Convention. Then it comes to the Ministry of Environment and Forest, the management, conservation and management of the wetlands, Rule 2010 and Rule 2017. And then we have the Wetland Authority in the state. Then we have the municipal corporations. In addition to that, there are a number of the agencies which are looking after this, urban development, the other kind of the smart city, the new, incarnation. So what is happening that under the smart city or under the development of the new, commercial cities, all these very high productive peri-urban lands have been annexed with the township. And I will give one example of a very highly productive Boria-Khurd multi-use wetland. Due to the conversion of this wetland for beautification, other rules, other users have been excluded, which is, against the law, against the regulations which have been laid down for even the Supreme Court judgment of 2012, where you cannot, alter the ecology of these peri-urban wetlands. So in the process, what has happened, a small example, 400 odd households and their coming generation will be deprived of the water resources. Nearly 250 cultivators, they will not have a drop of water for because this wetland was also connected with the canal. And the most the sufferer will be, there will be no freshwater aquaculture. And these, the women of that particular village will suffer because there is no alternative water. And you have to go for the groundwater. Now, in order to understand the peri-urban, not only the wetlands, but n number of the commons, what I advocated in my recent book, that we, Ostrom, fortunately I also know her personally. So Ostrom work we have extended in the context of the developing countries. And we have developed those parameters, not only the cultural, religion, because these peri-urban wetlands were also, catering the need of the cultural and the religious, ecosystem services. It was not only the provisional services, it was not only the regulatory services, but they were also catering this. And it was protecting the biodiversity, not only the aquafauna, that is the bird biodiversity, but also the very rare biodiversity which are, localized there. So this is the case of multi-use, but if you see the common grazing lands, at the peri-urban interface, now the same fat, this very high productive grazing land, they are also subjected to encroachment. And now, in many cases, if you see the old record, 60 or 70-year-old record, you will find that there was a rich, common lands, and now it has been disappeared. So there is a serious imbalance. What I argued in my book is serious imbalance in terms of the ecosystem services, serious imbalance in the hydrological regime. You have changed the hydrological regime. There was a well-connected 6-7 ponds with a major peri-urban water bodies, and you have destroyed those, hydrological regimes, which were, keeping these peri-urban water bodies very live. So we have to think collectively that it's fine. Delhi problem and other problem is okay, but if you take the whole eastern India, which I have been studying almost for 3-4 decades, and take the northeast, then you will find that these are very fragile ecosystems, and they are, the politicians, the bureaucrats, they are, in a comfort zone to convert these rare resources and deprive the unborn generation for taking the benefits of this very rare ecological, peri-urban resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I think it's always nice when bureaucrats admit this is happening, or former bureaucrats admit this is happening.
Bureaucrats are sensible.
I fully agree with you. But others, if you have any comments, observations, suggestions, yes, please.
Hello, I'm Rishikesh from Data Institute of Social Sciences, and my question is regarding when a particular area develops because of any reason, the socioeconomic power the community gets, and they want to develop the infrastructure there. Earlier, for example, earlier I used to live in a small house, now I have to build a more, or now I want to have, spacious infrastructure around my place. But around that place also we have ponds or the part of a forest. So as an individual right, that person builds a house. Now that person wants facilities to be there for drainage, for street lights, proper roads there. So in that sense, how we can sustainably, to have sustainable development, how do we, communicate that to the community that your idea of development may hamper the environment, or you need to change the way you want to see your area. So how that contradiction we can resolve, or what are the points that we can put forward so that we can better look at this junction.
Maybe Sachin, you want to go? Yeah, so one of the things that we look at when we talk to communities or when we are talking about in landscapes is you do have the commons, but you also have the different land uses for the commons, or even when it comes to private lands, right? So somewhere when it goes into the regional planning and in the planning phase itself, we have these dedicated zones of which we call the spun cities concept as well, where we're looking at the blue-green spaces that are conserved. And then, we still have these designated land uses for some zones that are absolutely no-touch zones. And the government has most autonomy when it comes, and even like community-based organizations have the most autonomy when it comes to commons, right? So even when our predictive exercise, when we spoke about food sovereignty, we didn't talk about private farmers or influencing their decision, but we spoke about the utilization of the tank commons. So while you bring up the infrastructure, the governments do need to keep in mind the land use dedicated for that particular piece of land. And I think that is one step we go forward. And along with that, you also integrate, have multiple uses for the land when you're like, even when we did we had, for example, when we looked at ecotourism or sort of a model in the coastal belts, we looked at a 5-finger model where, when we were developing these land use, even within the areas, when they were doing these ecological restorations, we ensured that it had multiple elements incorporated into the design processes itself, like whether it is urban farming or it is also like the preservation of the waterscapes and then the cultural spaces, etc. So that is one of the way that, because at the end of the day, the land is also limited, which is what you're trying to point, I think, yeah. But Sachin, you want?
We have some experiences from our earlier projects where we have encountered these kind of situations. The short answer is that it's hard to regulate any sort of an encroachment or bring sanctions upon people. If there is an individual who decides to just encroach upon whatever is in the neighborhood, even to the detriment of the others, he does it until there's someone watching it and bringing a sanction upon it. That's a plain fact. As well as that, India suffers from, this may be controversial, but India does suffer from very limited state capacity. State governments or any sort of a government does not have enough capacity to regulate, enforce, and then bring upon sanctions. So that remains for a fact. What does work, we have seen, is that if you increase stakeholders into it, if you increase collective character of a place, that is when. So how this can operate is on the first day we had Puttenahalli Lake case study being presented. That is one of the ways where community entirely owns up a place, and then there is enhancement of a collective character by setting up these trusts, and that is how you can bring in. So the moment there is an encroachment happening, if there is a voice raised, it gets rolled back. And fields of view people, they've been conducting social experiments on this, they might be able to vouch for it. When you raise a voice, when an encroachment has been done within a certain time frame, more often than not, we have seen it rolled back. Encroachments happen and stay and get regularized only when nobody raises a voice against it. This is where collective action or collective voice really works. That's just a short of it, but your experiences might vary across states. It may work differently in Bangalore than in Delhi.
Divya wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add 2 quick observations from the field that we've had. One is when agricultural land in general gets converted into physical property, I think one of the first things that happens is a the commons become gated. So while there is greater trusteeship and while there is community participation and all that, and Bangalore is a great example, it's also fenced. It's not available for a large number of workers, people who are other citizens of this, city, informal settlements, to be able to access these commons at all. So are they truly commons is a question we keep talking about when we are talking about the, are public spaces then commons? What exactly is the definition of commons in a city is a question that we want to think about. The second thing is, I think, in urbanization, one of the ways in which contradictions play out is that crisis in one sector starts pushing things in the other sector. So there is a housing crisis for the poor, there is a housing crisis for people who can't afford homes in the cities. The first place to enter the cities through the commons. That is where the kacha houses are being built. That is where the tarpaulins are being set up. So it's really actually a reflection of the housing crisis in the city where low-cost housing is not being built. And that's the entry that many communities are trying to get into the city. And I think that's not thought about enough when we think about the process of urbanization. Where is it actually starting? And I used to research commons many years ago, but I've moved quite away from it, talking more about labor. And I see the contradiction. I am not able to feel as passionately about commons anymore because of this question of what happens to people who are trying to get an entry into the city, because then we talk about protection as if, and I'm not talking about rural areas at all, I'm just talking about peri-urban and urban areas, because it's inherently contradictory to the rights of people who don't have citizenship in the city then.
Can I just add one short point? So I would regard Divya's response as more elegant way of, and much more nuanced. That's at the individual level. You could think about it at the systemic level also. And again, what excites me is the two policies that I cited in the beginning from Odisha and from Tamil Nadu. So the same encroachment at an individual level is also happening at, at a larger level, at departments level, where wetlands get subsumed under the city development, urban development authority, and then, the roads come up as he's showing. What Odisha has, articulated in the policy is that the urban development authority will now have participation, or one of the people sitting in the committee of decision making will be the block development officers of the peri-urban area, which is probably a town panchayat or a smaller place than a city. So for example, Sri Perumbudur is a taluk. And now they've said that take for instance the Chennai Metropolitan Urban Development Authority will now have the taluk level officers sitting with them and then taking collective decision on the expanded regional area planning. So this is how you have increased more. One could see this as, making a case of too many cooks as well. But what it is definitely arresting is this brazen, nobody knows it, and then you suddenly figure, oh, this place is now under the Urban Development Authority and there is a big outer ring road, 12 lane going through it. So that while you are looking else, the other way, and development happening at the back, encroachment happening, that will not happen, at least with these kind of policies. So it's slightly forward-looking, but that may be one of the answers indicating that these are the kind of practices you might want to follow, at least at the systemic level, and then, somewhere it starts correcting at the unit level as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Sachin. Yes, sir.
No, we are acutely aware. I'm Sarabjit. I work with UNICEF in Delhi. We are acutely aware of how urbanity is gulping away wetlands and all kinds of natural ecosystems. In 2005, I used to live in Pune, and that year was a huge flooding year, once in 100-year rainfall and that kind of stuff. And the commissioner of Pune decided to map the entire city's watersheds. All watersheds were mapped. 1,400 nodes were identified which were constrained. Majorly flooding happens where the channels meet. And plans were made for all the 1,400 to be decongested. So what is lost can also be recovered. If such a forum can at least give a call to action for something like that, what is lost, like the way it's lost, it's not lost. It can be dug again. Systematically, Pune has been investing year on year on the same plan, which was done in 2007, and decongesting many. Of course, they failed in number of them, but a lot has been recovered. So I think we, as urban planners, designers, I think got to have that guts to say that no, it's not lost. And the resilience infrastructure, just like the built infrastructure, there is resilience infrastructure. Unfortunately, we have not defined resilience infrastructure as standards, so there are no standards. What are the standards for? So I think many a times we lose out on in the court of law, particularly you come from there, that because we are not able to make our case with real sort of authentic standards around the natural ecosystems. Thanks.
So can I just have an additional comment? Yeah. So I think one of the ways in which like people start listening to is when we talk to it in economic terms, or when we because even in Chennai we had a similar case when in the 2015 floods. It's after that the entire city woke up to and started looking at its like water bodies and wetlands as not just drought proofing but also flood proofing, right? And like you said, the channels were so the entire SIPCOT of where the entire IT park was in water. And that was because it was the depression through which the water had to flow into the Buckingham Canal and then from there into the sea. So they had rediverted the channels away from the housing settlements and into the canal and then from there into the sea. So it's still possible, but I think somewhere people need to start looking at resilient infrastructure and the associated ecosystem services and the value in terms of economic terms that it would provide, or if it doesn't exist, be lost.
Yeah. So, if I may add a couple of things. Resilient infrastructure is a common terminology. But infrastructure for resilience, I think that is still not enough socialized amongst media, amongst people, amongst the urban planners. And one of the, I think, important things we can claim is that the ecosystem services are not static. They can be improved. Within a piece of land, its absorption capacity can be increased. Its, range of other things can be improved. So how do we improve ecosystem services from the same resource? I think that's the kind of commitment we require from the professionals. Thanks.
Let me just ask. We have time for only one question. If there's any other question from the audience, or if not, anybody else would like to, any final observations, questions? Yes, yeah.
Hello, I'm Disha. I just completed my master's from TIS and I've joined alongside with Rishika as a research associate at IGCS. So one question, I'm from Delhi and I've lived all my life in Delhi. So what I wanted to ask is how can we introduce traditional and local practices of the community, of the commons, of the people in these villages which are untapped by the planning authorities to develop or plan these peri-urbans even further, with Delhi being a culturally very sensitive city with people coming from all over the country, living here, having their ground here. So how can we integrate the urban, the coming up urban as well as the traditional and take it alongside forward?
I'd like to tell a very motivating fact to everybody here. See, a couple of years back, the Development Authority in Delhi, DDA, they declared more than 100 villages as declared urban. When you declare a village urban, what do? You declare this area as development area. The development area has agricultural land and commons. So in the act, when they notified the Gazette, they mentioned that this common land, they will be the developer entity of it. In technical terms, it means they are the landowners. So after 2 years, DDA issued a document and which they said that this land, the common land of these villages, will be used for the welfare of the villages. Because for those 2 years, number of villages, as I told you, wrote to the DDA with the Supreme Court judgment and these so-called, the winning on the Supreme Court, where it is already mentioned that this common land belongs to the villages. So if you are silent, you will suffer. You make, as Sachin said, if you raise your voice, then no matter how powerful the authority is, they cannot go against the rule of law. Unfortunately, again, I will tell you the grey side of it. I will just complete the statement. This said, the common land will be used for the village welfare. I have nothing against the city planners, but I know what they do. What they did, they added as per the sector plan. And the sector plan is not prepared by them. So they know that people will be against it, but they bring this professional, expertise in these matters. That imagine common villagers, how can they really, challenge them? It's very difficult unless they have professional knowledge. It's so difficult because whatever is happening with development authorities in Delhi, as Sir said, you name one development authority in the country, whatever they are doing in the different parts of the country, they have learned it from DDA. So whatever mistakes is happening in the country is because they have a precedent of DDA. And nobody helped the villages. That was the reason all these wrong things are happening in Pune, Mumbai, Chennai, Bangalore. You tell me, Hyderabad. Demolitions are happening in Hyderabad. Why? Were they not aware about these comments? They knew. But the local communities are... See, when it's I belong to an urban village. See, the common understanding of the village was very different earlier. But now the village is not together as a community. People are living together, but their priorities are very different. It's extremely difficult to bring those people together. So this is a challenge, and she has asked a very good question that how do we introduce these things. So me personally, I've interacted with people not only in the villages about the RWAs of the city, and they really care about their parks and their common areas. Unfortunately, the policy in these development acts is such that what government has done earlier, they will just tell you, we have already developed the city, you have this, you come together and come back with a plan so that we can offer you services. But ultimately, to bring people together is a very difficult point. Example, there is a park near my place. I live in a village. In this side, on the opposite side, there is a city. So this park is kind of commercially exploited by the MCD because they utilize it for commercial functions. MC Mehta had already said that parks are for leisure of children and elderly. But the problem is, we talk about the elected representatives, the administrators, everybody has a stake in it. So I am fighting that this park should be developed for the children, for the elderly, and the RWs over here. They also wanted park, cultural spaces, we have gazebos, anything, so that this whole daily cycle or a weekend, people have certain common spaces where they can celebrate and be together with their family and friends. But unfortunately, the elected representatives are always looking at the numbers, where do they get their vote banks. Our case is pending in the Supreme Court. I won this case in NGT, but the MCD took it to the Supreme Court. So these are the challenges we're facing, and I'm hoping that more people raise their voice so we can protect these spaces. I spoke to the vice chairman of the DDA 1 week back. See, what is happening is illegal construction in the city. Nobody was raising a voice. I posed a simple question to him. In similar platform, there was a conference at PhD Chamber of Commerce on Friday. I asked him, you are aware this illegal construction is happening. We have satellite images with us. We can see the build-up and everything. And I'm sure if you remember next week or last week on Monday, the LG has suspended the commissioner of land management because of the same reason. That when we have already told you, you use the satellite images, you look at what is happening in the city, why are you not doing it? Because people are, taking advantage of this land. Nobody is here for a common purpose. Everybody is there for a personal purpose. That's what I can say.
On that not very optimistic note, I just like to... I think one of the takeaways from our session, as our colleague from UNICEF also has suggested, in a lot of the other sessions in this convening, we've been conscious of how till some decades back there was this notion that if you want to conserve nature, if you want to conserve ecology, you may have to sometimes look over the needs of people. That used to be a notion some decades back. In a lot of the sessions here, a lot of us now recognize that is no longer that's a fallacious notion. It's not like ecology and people are antithetical to each other. You can look after the needs of both side by side. That sort of awareness perhaps needs to come more and more in cities where we often now see this sort of environmental anxiety about ecological resources which have a lot of ecosystem services. There's this great amount of anxiety about how to save the environment of cities. And in that anxiety, we are often perhaps not thinking as much as we should of the people who make that city. That might be one of the takeaways which I think from all the conversations we've had, the suggestions we've had, the discussions we've had, that when it comes to urban commons also, it would be useful to think of people and commons side by side and not as opposed to each other. On that somewhat more hopeful note, thank you very much, my fellow panelists, and thank you everybody for coming here, making this an enriching session. Thank you.
यहीं आ जाओ सर, यहीं हो। आप आगे आइए थोड़ा, मैं हूँ सबसे इधर हो जाइए, आप इधर आ जाइए सर, सर आप बीच में आ जाइए, ठीक है सर, आप क्लोज हो जाइए, वेट, थैंक यू।